Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast episode. It's the Software Plaza podcast, and I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Software Plaza. And it's my privilege, it's my joy to actually be chatting each week to a different creator, different innovator in the space that we're in right now, in the space of uh, cloud native computing. But more recently, it's been also about just the overlap between cloud native computing and AI, because obviously AI is the talk of the town and everyone is innovating, everyone is building around AI. And so that's really taken center stage over the past 6 months or so in these conversations. And I'm really interested to dig into that and see what's really happening out there. Uh, and today, yeah, we're going to be talking to Amod Gupta, who's the VP of Product and Design at Endor Labs. That's Endor Labs, and their website is endorlabs.com. And I just wanted to read the tagline for us to start. It says, "Speed and security, not speed or security, speed and security. The best teams code without compromise." And it goes on to explain it that the agentic application security platform that understands your code and business logic, delivering zero distractions for developers. All right, so sounds already very developer centric and with security and speed in focus, not just one or the other. So that's kind of setting the stage for our conversation. I hope it sounds interesting. And if you enjoy this conversation, I want to encourage you, head over to softwareplaza.com or wherever you're watching or listening from, subscribe and check out all of the other conversations we've had over the past few months. There's been some really interesting stuff that's been demoed over here. Um, with that, I'd like to welcome Amod. Amod, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining. And we'd like to start with just getting to know a bit about you and your background, your journey to Endor.
Thank you, Twain. It's a pleasure to be here. My journey started as a software developer at Microsoft, and that foundation still shapes how I think about products.
Hmm.
I used to write C++ code for Outlook in my early years, and then moved on to product leadership roles in Visual Studio, App Dynamics, which was a B2B observability company where I worked on analytics products, observability products before it was acquired by Cisco. And then most recently, before joining Endor, I was head of product at Traceable, which was an API security company that's now merged with Harness. So,
Hmm.
being in the B2B enterprise product management space for a while. And what pulled me into Endor was just the timing and scope of the problem.
Hmm.
Development is going through massive changes, both
Hmm.
in the way code is being written with AI now, architecturally, how it's being shipped, and
Hmm.
the role of security that needs to evolve with that change.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's what pulled me into Endor. Nice to meet you and looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it's fascinating how, the early organization that we work with often shapes a lot of our views, our values, just so subconsciously. And I can totally relate to that as well. But I think it's nice that you kind of hold on to those roots, I think,
Yeah,
over the years.
definitely.
Um, talking about AI coding and just the need for security given AI coding and just the rise of it. I wanted to first get us started with kind of figuring out what are we talking about in terms of the supply chain, which part of the supply chain are we securing, and which is not the focus for today, because the supply chain is really complex, and there's vendors that solve for the beginning of the supply chain, the scanning the container images and just making sure that your sources are clean. And then there's at the other end, there's vendors solving for runtime, threat protection, and then
Right,
everything in between. So
right.
tell us a bit about just what we are talking about today, which part of the supply chain that we're talking about.
Yeah, you started with the mission of the company, which is code without compromise. Um,
Hmm.
Endor Labs is a product. which aims to secure the code that is being written or generated these days and all the tools that it depends on. And we
Mm-hmm.
have various products in our portfolio that help customers do that. But we are very focused on code and the supply chain of tools that go into code generation. We don't focus on
Okay.
the runtime aspect. So this is first party code that you may write or your agents may write. These are
Mm-hmm.
open source dependencies that your code may depend on. These might
Mm-hmm.
be source code managers, GitHub Actions.
Mm-hmm.
These might be images that you are going to deploy your apps on. And
Mm-hmm.
these days, it might be AI coding harnesses like Cursor, the extensions
Mm-hmm.
they pull in, the MCP servers, the skills that reside on developer workstations. So, in a nutshell, our mission is to secure the code for our users and all the things that that code depends on.
All right. All right. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's good we've got that sorted. Uh, Wanted to get your view and ask you your hot take on which is your favorite coding harness, as you said. I'm sure you do a lot of building yourself because you're trying to figure this out, build alongside the others, and launching solutions out there. So tell me your favorite one, why you like it the most, and yeah.
I find myself switching between Claude Code and Cursor quite frequently.
Okay,
And I
okay.
like them for different reasons. Um, I like the fact that I like the cursor UI where I can, in a single click, open a file explorer and see the changes that
Mm,
the tool is making. I like
mm,
Claude Code for um, the asynchronous subagentic way that it can execute these tasks in. So I find
mm.
myself starting with cursor a lot more and ending with cursor a lot more, and in the middle I'll shift to Claude Code when I know what's exactly being built and it can fire off a bunch of
Nice.
stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so I
That's
constantly
kind
shift
of the.
between those two.
Mhm. Yeah, I think when you start to use multiple, of those agents, then you're moving to the next level. And yeah, I
Yeah,
guess Cursor is kind of known for speed, right? Since the start. And I think Claude Code has been known for its reasoning and its awareness and all of that. So I
yeah,
guess that kind of makes sense. You want a quick start with Cursor, make sure everything is right with Claude, and then go back and finish things up with Cursor. Makes sense. How
right.
do you see this space evolving? Because, it keeps changing so fast. 6 months ago, what it was is completely different from today.
Yeah.
It changes so fast. What have you seen over the past year with how these coding harnesses have evolved and changed? What surprises you? What catches your attention? And where do you see all of this shaping up to right now?
That's a really good question. I don't know if anyone can predict what's going to happen in the next 6 months, but
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
been interesting to see over the last year is everyone expects the quality of the models to go up. That's just
Mhm,
how mentally people think about it. Mythos is,
mhm,
I don't know if it's still widely accessible to everyone, but based on the news reports that are coming out, that adds yet another layer of capabilities on top of Opus, which was already pretty good. And the same thing on the OpenAI side with their frontier lab models, very similar to what Gemini's and Google are doing on their side. So that's kind
mhm.
of baked into the expectations. Almost everyone thinks in the next 6 months, more and more and more capable models will come out, and that's, expected.
Yeah,
What has
yeah.
been surprising is the way in which the architecture has evolved to extend the capabilities of these models. And what I mean by
Mhm,
that is 1 year, 2 year ago, we were all talking
mhm.
about prompt engineering, how prompt
Yeah,
engineering is going to be a first class role and how many LinkedIn job postings are there for prompt engineering. And that
right.
that has just disappeared from the vocabulary.
Mhm, mhm,
Then MCP servers were the talk of town last year. They are another way
mhm,
of extending agent capabilities.
mhm,
This year, earlier in the year, we were talking a lot about skills. Skills can
mhm.
replace MCP servers, and they are even better because they can do a lot more things and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
Hooks briefly took up the mind share for a while. Hooks came on the scene there. They were not as widely I don't think they're still as widely supported as MCP in terms of
Mhm,
how many coding agents support hooks, but
mhm,
they let you add a deterministic component in the LLM execution, which is otherwise very non-deterministic.
mhm.
So hooks caught people's fancy for a while. And these days, coding harnesses, right? I mean, Everyone's building their
Mm-hmm.
own harness. Toby from Shopify, he wrote a blog or a tweet about what he calls River. So in the future, I expect that to continue. I expect a
Mm-hmm.
lot of code generation to move from developer workstations to the cloud. That's still happening,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not happening to the extent that I think it will in 6 months. Generating code on the workstation makes you synchronous to an extent. You can, as long, you can, the agents can do what they're supposed to do as long as the
Okay.
laptop's functioning. But if you do that in the cloud, if you build your own autonomous or semi-autonomous pipelines in the cloud, you can get a next level of parallelization. So frontier companies are doing that, but I expect to see a lot more of that with companies building their own harnesses, building their own code generation pipelines in the cloud
Mm.
in the next 6 months.
Okay, yeah. So I thought skills are today and the latest and greatest. So
Huh.
it's interesting to hear you say no, they're passé. And I'm sure for a lot of listeners as well, they've just stumbled upon skills and they're like, I have to build all these skills, and they're probably doing that right now. But interesting
Yeah.
that you're putting out more stuff that's going beyond skills.
Yeah.
I have to dig in and ask though, to slow down a bit. Tell us what you mean by coding harness, because I don't fully understand it, and I would like to understand it better from you, and how you see it as well will help us for the rest of this conversation. So give us kind of a definition and explanation of coding harness. I think it's a key term for us to really,
Yeah, it
understand.
is. It is. It is. It is a key term. In the most simple terms, think of Cursor as a coding harness. Think of Claude Code as a coding harness.
Hmm.
You can use different models from within Cursor and Claude Code. You can use the same model in both Cursor and Claude Code, give them the same task, and they will produce different outputs. In fact, that's one of the things that
Hmm.
Endor has been doing. We have this benchmark called Agent Security League, Agent Sec League. And whenever a new model comes out, we publish how functionally correct that model is given a task and how
Hmm.
secure
Hmm.
is the code that that model produces given a task. And we
Hmm.
find routinely that the same model produces different percentages, scores differently against, significantly differently against the benchmark, depending on the harness. So you
Hmm.
might take, a Frontier Labs model that's just come out. You might put it
Hmm.
in Cursor, and Cursor's harness, the IDE, it's more than an IDE now, right? So that whole system that runs that model has prompts and safeguards and tools and context that it gives to the model, which is different from what
Hmm.
Claude Code does and the way Claude Code provides it. And
Hmm.
those two, in my mind, are examples of harness that we use daily. Now, people are
Hmm.
experimenting with their own harnesses. So, if you run a company of 100 developers, yes, they're all individually getting productive with Cursor and Claude Code, and they're using AI to help answer questions and do code reviews and do all the other stuff. But how do you unlock that organization-wide productivity? Everyone knew what
Hmm.
SDLC was. You would write code by hand, you would create a pull request in a feature branch, merge that to the main branch, and then CI pipelines would kick in and all those things would happen. But what does
Hmm.
that mean when you're coding with AI? If you can create a semi-autonomous pipeline where the code gets generated somewhere, it automatically gets tested, it automatically gets scanned for security issues, it automatically gets scored against the threat model based on your security guidelines. And by the time a pull
Hmm.
request is generated in GitHub or GitLab or any of your SCMs, all of these things have already happened.
Hmm.
So in a broader sense, that's what a harness would evolve into. In the most
Hmm.
real tangible term, I think of Cursor and I think of Claude Code and I think of Hermes agent and all those things as harnesses.
Nice. How do you see all of this evolving? Like, where are the levers going to be? And are there going to be different levers, like for individuals, would they configure their harnesses differently from other individuals on the team? And would there be settings for harnesses at the team level? Do you see it evolving that way? Kind of like RBAC maybe, or
No,
um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Actually, I think you're right on both counts. I think people will um, enhance the capabilities of their harnesses with their custom skills, prompts, hooks, instructions, rules, right? There are all these form factors in which you can guide an LLM to do things in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Permissions is a big part of it. And then there
Mm-hmm.
will be enterprise-wide um, governance around these
Right.
harnesses, right? So one of the things that we are hearing at Endor from a lot of our customers is, um, look, even if we can trust the large frontier labs that build, you know, these models, Anthropic and OpenAI and even Cursor, if you want to include that in that list, and we
Mm-hmm.
can trust them to produce secure code and secure harness. We, the MCP servers and the skills and all of the other extensions and plugins are a wild, wild west. So
Mm-hmm.
what enterprise standards and regulations should we be thinking about in securing these ecosystems wherever they run, whether on developer workstations or in enterprise harnesses? The other thing that
Mm-hmm.
also comes up in our customer conversation so much is all these incidents that keep getting in the news, right? On April 26th, there was an incident that made the news where a company's production database was wiped out within 9 seconds, including all the backups, because the agent was running in a mode where they were allowed to do any action without asking for permission from a user. There were no malicious packages involved. There were no malicious MCP servers involved. There were no skills involved. It was a mistake that the agent made. And the
Mm-hmm.
guardrail that whenever you go in to drop a table or whenever you go in to delete a database, you should check with human first. That
Mm-hmm.
guardrail was bypassed because previously somebody had given them the ability to execute autonomously. So these are
Mm-hmm.
behavioral questions that come with not the model, the harness. In what permissive capacity are you operating a model? What is it allowed to do? What things can it access? What secrets, what keys, what cloud credentials are present on the workstation on which this harness is operating that can then be leveraged by model to produce these to do these things. 99% of the times it does great things, but 1% of the times when bad things happen, it has catastrophic results. So both things are true.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to customize these harness to their taste so that they become more productive in their custom workflows. And enterprises will come in with some guidelines on making sure catastrophic incidents don't happen.
That's a striking example there of that incident. I want to ask if you have another example that you could share from some of the conversations you've had of something similar that happened, and if you generally feel what's your feel as you speak to and as you see people doing building with AI. Do you get the sense that people are just building stuff and giving giving over provisioning permissions, giving the agents privileges without really having checks and balances in place? uh, what's your view on that? Do you feel like what do you see some of the common pitfalls and some of the practices that you feel are hurting more than helping as we're building? And even if you could throw in another example like the one you just mentioned.
Yeah, there are numerous examples. One of the other common ones that we keep hearing again and again is, and it happened to one of my teammates here. It was back in the early days, there was an agent went and deleted an entire directory. So RM minus RF, RM dash RF. You'll see this in the news again and again with different agents. Um, because they're operating in some harnesses called this YOLO mode, some harness called this
Yeah.
dangerously skip permissions
Mm-hmm.
parameter that's passed to these models. And
Yeah.
so uh, they're not doing anything malicious most of the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's a mistake that happens, but that has vast consequences. Dropping
Mm-hmm.
tables, dropping databases, that's also another common one. Then, in terms of incidents, the one that made a lot of news in the first quarter of this year was when OpenClaw became popular and went through several of its naming conventions. That was called Mortbot at some point, OpenBot at some point, then went through
Yeah.
OpenClaw and several iterations, and people
Yeah.
excitedly installed that in personal capacity, in enterprise capacity, and then it
Mm-hmm.
autonomously did a whole bunch of things that weren't supposed to
Mm-hmm.
happen.
Mm-hmm.
So there are numerous incidents that come to mind. And so what I think
Mm-hmm.
will eventually happen is, and the gap here is that if you beyond hello world, if you sit down with these agents to accomplish a task that's going to take 2 days or 3 days or a week to do, as most engineers are doing, the promise is that once you've given it context, it can run and do things on its own.
Mm,
But if every time you tab into that harness, whether it's Cursor or Claude Code, and you see the terminal paused because the model is asking, do you trust this folder? Am I allowed to operate in this folder? Or the model is
mm,
asking for something else, or the model is asking you to do something. Well, whereas mentally you've thought that when you've gone through the plan mode, this is fine. So I think what's
mm,
missing is some form of push mechanism that you as a
mhm,
developer, when you've given this model all the context that you think is needed, and this model is operating in that context autonomously, if it needs your permission, then it pushes that notification to you. And you can somehow tune how frequently you get this notification and how infrequently you get this notification. Um,
right.
That has also two components. One is local, which is how much you trust this model, what skills, what guardrails have you set. And the second is
Mm,
enterprise. Some things that the enterprises just don't want to happen. Whenever a drop table command is being run, make sure you get an explicit yes approved from the user. So I think there is a need and a space for both of these to come around. Like we saw that with, personal notifications on the phone. You want to get notified for everything. You want to get push notifications for everything. No, and now we've come to a place where you can choose per app which notification you want. Something similar needs to happen here.
mm, mm. I think the word that catches my attention from what you just explained is trust, and makes me think about the kind of trust that developers have when they interact with these agents. Just a lot of times assuming that the agent gets it
Yeah,
and the agent has my interests, my best interests in its mind as it's doing these tasks. And the agent is doing so many complex things that would take me so long to do. So it must definitely figure out even these security steps and things to avoid, and it must be aware. It should know.
yeah,
I think there's this level of trust that gets built because it seems like the agent is so capable. But I
yep.
think that's where the trap is, right? Especially when it asks for permissions, uh, I think you often just blindly give permissions because you think, hey, the agent knows what it's doing. If it's asking for this permission, it should be something that's not dangerous. So I should just allow it. Don't you think that really is the trap?
That's a really good point you made, Twain. That is the trap. But consider the flip side, right? Consider that you are the developer and you are in their shoes. And you've given the agent to take a Python library and migrate it to Go for some reason, right? Because you're mandated by your company to write only Go code and there's no ecosystem for Python. Now, let's say this is a huge library that has a lot of transitive dependencies and it needs to do a lot of migration, use open source Go code where possible, pull in more write first party Go code where not possible. And the agent is going through that. And you've sat down and you've planned this whole thing and you've given it all the context.
Mm.
15 minutes later, it's paused and it's asking you for help. What it has done in those 15 minutes, where is it in its journey
You
of
have no
implementing
clue.
something? You have no clue. And so now
Yeah.
you can spend X amount of time trying to get up to
Yeah.
speed with the context and deciding whether you want to allow this action or not, or trust the agent. And like, so 99 times out of 100, you're going to trust the agent and
Yeah. Yeah.
let it go. And then when it happens six more times, you're going to trust it even more and say, look, all the last six times I just said trust. Why do I want it to be paused anyway, waiting for me to say yes, trust? Let me
Mm.
just tell it that I trust it implicitly, and that's where you fall into this dangerous
Mm.
territory.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think uh, a lot of times people trust agents to be their own reviewers, but that as well falls flat in many use cases. Like
Yes.
uh, one of these guys was saying, the agents can do the most complex, simulations and calculations, and then they can get something very basic that's very evident to you wrong, which you wouldn't understand how they could get that wrong. And that's one of the quirks as well with agents, right?
Absolutely, and absolutely. And security is actually a very good example of that. Like we were talking about at the beginning of the call, agents get functionally correct code to a very large extent, but not secure. But that code isn't necessarily more secure than before. And
Mm,
to your example, there are, I think, well-founded reasons for that. Agents are trained on open source code. They don't have in their training an in security intelligence layer that tells them, I should learn this pattern and I shouldn't learn this pattern. That comes after the
mm,
fact. They are basically
mhm,
training on frequency. How many times has a pattern been repeated? And so if there's a need to generate code, which pattern should I repeat? So
mm,
the security intelligence layer isn't there. Then the other reason that that happens from time to time is because they have a training window that gets cut off at a certain date. And so any new
mhm,
vulnerabilities that were discovered after that training window haven't made it into their, you know, um, um, model yet. So security is a good example of that. They'll
mhm,
generate functionally correct code, but in some cases for APIs that are returning sensitive data, PII data, they'll choose to use basic auth as opposed to OAuth, or something like that would happen. We see that
mhm.
repeated.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting stuff. I wanted to segue into talking about the solution to all of this, because I think we've painted the picture really clearly and really well about just the state of things today in AI and how it's kind of the Wild West with people just building in different directions, but there's little guardrails in place. And these harnesses, while we have them and they're the talk of the town today, uh, they aren't the answer to security, but they themselves need to be secured. And so everyone who's building with these harnesses are also thinking about security top of mind. Let's segue to talking about the solution to all of this. So kind of trace it in broad strokes for us, and then we get into more finer details about just your approach to it. What
Yeah,
are some of the principles that you would probably start with? Some of the key big ideas in terms of what you should be doing.
yeah, I think that's a really good one. Security scanners and tools in this domain have traditionally been used downstream of code generation. Humans used to write code, it ended up in a pull request, and then it would
Yep.
get scanned. And they've
Which is why
traditionally
the
been
shift left movement kind of gain traction.
shift left, gain traction, and even shift left. The definition of shift left, and I'll tell you from hundreds of these conversations with customers, in the context of shift left, before AI code generation came, the conversation could be, do you scan pull requests? Do you have pull request comments? That used to be as far left as we'd go. Shift
Right.
left really should be at the point of code generation, right? Scanner shouldn't be looked at as a ticket factory. Scanner should really
Hmm.
be the intelligence layer that provides security context to both humans, the developers, and the coding agents, a context that they don't naturally have because of the reasons I
Hmm.
mentioned, right? Developers are trained on and optimized for generating more features. Coding agents are trained on open source code. None of them
Hmm.
naturally have this security context. That's where the tools can come in. But if the
Right.
tools interact with the code for the first time when it ends up in a pull request, then it's already too
Hmm.
late because all the tokens that went into code generation, code testing, making sure that it's functionally correct, making sure that it meets the plan needs, all of a sudden to discover at the time of pull request that, oops, you use basic authentication or there is a SQL injection or there's some cross-site scripting problem here. And now you're going back to square one. So
Hmm.
first and foremost, the security scanners need to be a part of code generation lifecycle. One of the
Hmm.
things, for example, that Endor is doing is when you are, let's say you were writing an application with your favorite coding agent on your laptop, and as part of writing that application, that coding agent is going to pull in open source library of a certain version.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
shouldn't have to wait till the entire code is written to realize that that open source library version has a critical vulnerability in it. At
Right.
the time of doing an npm install or a pip install or changing your POM XML file, whenever that open source library makes it to the package version, the coding agent and the model should be able to call a purpose-built tool. And
Hmm.
I say purpose-built because it needs to be extremely fast. That can tell you that the package version that you're pulling in is malware, or the package version that
Hmm.
you're pulling in has two critical vulnerabilities. And by the way, here's a better alternative. Use this version
mm,
instead, or use this library instead. And so um, that's one of the things that needs to happen. So
mhm,
the capabilities of the platform need to be modularized in such a way that the agents that are generating code can use them at the point at which the code is being generated, not after the fact. Certainly run a scan after the fact, but before it
mhm,
reaches a pull request still, so that the agent that's generating the code still has all the context. And when the pull request lands, it shouldn't
mhm,
only be functionally correct, it should also be secure based on your own thresholds that you define in some policies. That's one
mhm,
part of the problem that needs to be solved. And the
mhm,
second part that needs to happen, and for us, that's the AI coding agent governance product, is
mm,
governing the harness. So giving you, first and foremost, an inventory of, are your developers using Cursor? Are your developers using Claude Code? Are your developers using VS Code Copilot? Are they using some other coding tool harness to generate code? What MCP servers are installed?
mm,
What skills are being used? Are these MCP servers, first of all, malicious or benign? Secondly, even if they are non-malicious, do they have any risky tools that send data back home? Or the skills that are on developer workstations, do they have instructions that can cause bad things to happen? So
mhm,
this has nothing to do with the security of the code. This is to do with the supply chain of AI generation tools, AI code generation tools that go into
mhm,
your code factory, for lack of a better term.
mhm,
Um, and then when the agents are running and the harness is executing to generate code, even if you've skipped permissions, even if you're operating this in YOLO mode, enterprise can come in and set up guardrails and say, look, irrespective of what an individual developer permission is, any time that the coding agent tries to do RM-RF, ask the
mhm,
developer. Anytime the coding agent does drop table or uses an MCP server to exfiltrate data that back out, ask for permission. Those are very top level examples that we've been talking about,
mhm.
but both things have to happen in this new world.
Mm-hmm. Wow, really interesting there. One thing that comes to my mind as you're talking is just how this compares to some of the older models that we've had in place for some time. Like, we've had like solutions that scan container images, for example, as they're being downloaded, or we've had solutions focused on, just keeping track of open source dependencies and just even which packages you're downloading and if they're vulnerable. We've had some of those solutions existing for a while, but I may be wrong, but I think the stack has become more complex now with AI, given agents and different models and different vendors, tools. The landscape has changed from before. It seems to me like that. That's one of the reasons why those old tools may not work today, is my view, my guess. And I was just wanting to get your thoughts on this. How would this generation of you know the security tools that you're talking about that would scan, not just open source, but even these harnesses, the models they're using, the MCPs, and just the whole infrastructure that's being used by developers, how is it different from the previous generation of, let's say, container image scanners or open source package scanners? Give us some insight on that.
Yeah, I think the one thing that absolutely makes it very different is some of these constructs didn't exist previously, like the MCP servers and the skills and the harnesses, right? Humans were still responsible for generating code. So that
Mm-hmm.
is certainly a way in which these security tools, this generation security tools have to be different. So in the sense that they have to be mindful of those paradigms and also be able to scan those paradigms for security, meaning you should be able to execute as an MCP server, but you should also be able to tell that there are all these MCP servers installed and some of them are risky and some of them are not. So that's one way in which
Mm-hmm.
the traditional tools have just no concept of these new
Mm-hmm.
paradigms. But the two other ways then in which the world has moved forward is, one is speed. The
Mm-hmm.
speed of code generation has changed. We are just seeing a lot more
Right.
code that's being generated, a lot more vulnerabilities being found, a lot more
Mm-hmm.
repositories coming online.
Yeah.
And if you look at the number of packages that get published on public registries like NPM, that has
Mm-hmm.
become that has gone up 3 times. There was an outage
Mm-hmm.
on GitHub a few days ago that was in the news for all the wrong reasons. But if you think about GitHub, the amount of volume of code that's being now stored on GitHub and being pushed to GitHub has skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
So they have
Mm-hmm.
had to change those things also. So one is speed,
Right.
more code being written, not necessarily more secure code, more
Right.
code. There's a lot of data, hours and outside that proves that functionally correct code, yes, secure code, no. The other thing
Mm-hmm.
that's happened is that the effort required to generate an exploit by adversaries is much less now.
Mm-hmm.
You can write an exploit for some studies, say less than $3 uh, in a lot of cases. So for less than $3, you can generate an exploit for a well-known application.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to reconcile both of these forces. As a security um, practitioner, you have to be
Mm-hmm.
mindful of all the code that's coming your way that needs to be secure. And you've also got to be mindful of more adversaries, faster attack, less time to exploit, because AI has also enabled that to happen. What
Mm-hmm.
that does is that instead of traditional tools that were mainly scanners and were ticket factories that would open tickets and tell you create backlogs of vulnerabilities, the world has moved to remediation. I think in the
Okay.
next few months, you will see more and more products come out and talk about how fast they enable remediation and
Mm-hmm.
um, the fact that actually this was one of the first slides I used to have in my roadmap document. Like Endor Labs was built on this principle that
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to be a tool that helps you find things. We want to be a tool that helps you fix things. So some of the concepts that we have around reachability, upgrade impact analysis came from that. But regardless, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's more true in the AI era than before. Like tools like Endor Labs help you fix things. They'll be
Mm-hmm.
That'll become the benchmark for security products.
All right, all right. And you guys have been working, you've been building something to solve all of this. It's called AURI, that's AURI. That's a platform from Endor Labs. That's a solution for this. It's your take on what security should look like. Tell
Yeah.
us about it, and then after that, we'll get into a demo and a tour of just what it looks like.
Sure, yeah. So Ori um, is a platform, like you said, right? It's a security intelligence layer, as we were talking about previously, and it's meant to make sure that the AI generated code is secure. So we
Mm-hmm.
recognized some time ago that AI generated code also offers some opportunities for security tools. There are lots of, risky things that happen with it, and we talked about it. But the
Mm-hmm.
benefits of AI generating code outweigh the risks. Therefore, it's taken off, and you see all of these models and productivity and all of that. It also presents some opportunities for security tools, but security tools need to think about this very, very differently. If you think
Mm-hmm.
about what a scanner used to be a black box. You would input code, and what you'd get in the output are findings or security issues. And then you have a large backlog, and you can prioritize and operate on those list of findings and fix some and then scan again and so on. But what was happening within the scanner was a black box.
Mm-hmm.
Endor used to do reachability analysis, which would reduce noise. Somebody else would do something else, and so on. But what happened inside that black box was one thing. You would scan,
Right.
and then you'd get an output. With
Yeah.
AI coding tools, I gave you an example of pulling in a new package version. That's not true. So with Ori, we fundamentally rethought how our platform should work for AI generated code. We think
Okay.
of Ori in three or four layers, 4 layers actually. At the bottom layer is the proprietary data that Endor has. So that has been our
Okay.
data mode, that has been our advantage. This is data about vulnerabilities. So for all
Mm-hmm.
for example, all the vulnerabilities that have been introduced in the last 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
Endor Labs looks at every single one of those vulnerabilities opens that up and identifies the exact line of code in an open source dependency that's affected by that vulnerability. That's not information that's available in public domain. What you'd get in public domain is, Spring Boot version so and so has these 39 vulnerabilities, but you don't know which
Mm-hmm.
line, which method, which function they affect. So
Mm-hmm.
there are other things. We have our own proprietary malware feed. We have our own embeddings database. So there's a whole bunch of data mode.
Mm-hmm.
What we've built on top of this data mode are tools that LLMs can use. So, for example, we've built a tool that navigates your source code through a call graph. So, we take your source code, we imagine that as a call graph, and we've built tools that help you navigate that code. If you look at what a lot of these models do and coding harnesses do, they will grep. They will use rip grep, they will use grep, but at the end of the day, they'll do search, semantic search, but they'll do search, which is a very wasteful way of burning tokens. But the tasks they're doing are also very different. They're not focused on just security. In fact, they're not focused on security.
Mm-hmm.
We are focused on security. So a lot of times, what we have to do is when we find something vulnerable, we have to navigate the call chain to understand if this method that has a security issue is even reachable from some input. Or upstream from this method, there are already input sanitizations and mitigations that are present in code, so I don't need to worry about this. For example, if I look at a method and the method takes a command and just executes it, and the command can be rm-rf, I need to know if somewhere upstream of this method, is there another method that's checking that all the dangerous commands are not allowed to pass through here. That's an
Mm-hmm.
example of why you would need tools like code navigation. So we've built a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of these tools that navigate the code, that find locations of interest, that serve as a API to your code. You can ask it questions that will tell you what the code is doing because that's how LLMs operate. Those tools don't exist outside. Then that was the second layer. So you have the proprietary layer at the bottom. Then you have the purpose-built tools that help you solve security issues in a very efficient manner. Then on top of that, we
Mm-hmm.
have these agents that are purpose built. So we have agents that are built for detection. We have agents that are built for triaging those detections. We have agents that are built for generating exploits against any of these findings. Agent that is looking at remediation given the exploit, given the triage information. Agents that's looking at the threat model. So if you have a plan, if you have security guidelines during the code review process, can I tell you that you're using a form of authentication, you're using basic auth or using bearer auth, but your security guidelines say you should only be using OAuth,
Mm-hmm.
those type of things. That's the third layer.
Mm-hmm.
So the agents themselves make use of these tools, but
Mm-hmm.
Claude and Cursor and Codex and OpenAI can directly make use of these tools themselves. They're available, and I'll quickly show you an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of this AURI layer, or this data tools agent layer, sits the form factor in which all of this can be consumed. If at the end of the day you still have to run a command line utility or go and press a button in the UI, then you've defeated the purpose. So all of the Endor Labs functionality is available as part of as an MCP server, as a skill through hooks that you can invoke. You can add as part of your coding agent harness so that these things happen automatically and you don't have to manually go in and press buttons. That's what AURI
Mm-hmm.
is in a nutshell.
Wow, really interesting the stack. Yeah, it definitely sounds like a lot of thought gone into that. Yeah, I'm just yeah curious to see just the demo, and I'm sure I'll have more follow-up questions when I even see that. But yeah, if you could give us a walkthrough of what Ori looks like, that would be a good next step. Yep, see your screen.
Okay, so this morning I was building something and I had to change my tactic midway. I wanted to build it. What I was trying to do was I was trying to build a tool to do web search for an agent that I'm building. And the coding agent suggested that I use this open source library called DDGS, and I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
sure if I should just press yes and download
Mm-hmm.
that open source library. So I hopped over to Cursor and
Mm-hmm.
gave it this prompt. I mean, let's do that again. Move my window. Use Endor to tell me if this open source library is malicious or a safe package. Now, the fact that
Mm-hmm.
Endor has a proprietary malware database, the fact that that database is exposed as a modular tool that Cursor can use
Mm-hmm.
and call, um, is what's going to come here. So it's looking at MCP tools and gathering information about the package. It's
Mm-hmm.
find of the different tools that are part of Endor's MCP server. It's found out that dependency for risk or dependency for vulnerabilities is the right tool to call. If you,
Mm-hmm.
the MCP server is already installed, but if you hop over to Cursor settings, um, it needs permission to authenticate to call that tool. Let me give it permission. I was going to show you Cursor settings, move that down. I have my MCP server installed. It has a bunch of these tools that let you do certain things. I've got some other MCP servers installed as well. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so here's an example of a coding agent harness
Mm-hmm.
using one of the tools that is purpose built for AI code generation to tell you whether a new dependency that you're pulling in is malicious or not. It's not, what it's not doing is it's not scanning all your code. That'll take a few minutes. It's just telling you, hey, you're about to pull in a new dependency. Is that malicious or not? You could do the same
Mm-hmm.
thing on Claude Code. I mean, here's a repository. I can go into Claude Code. If you're somebody that doesn't use MCP server, that uses Skill, you can say use Endor to scan this repo for security issues. Let's see if I have my skills, etc. set up. And now Claude Code should ideally find Endor skill. Look, it did. Endor setup, loading the skill. And then it's going to go
Mm-hmm.
through a bunch of these steps. Now, it's going to ask me, yes, I want to proceed. Um, I think it'll, okay. So it found that Endor is not authenticated. It needs to authenticate it and so on. So it'll call the right commands. What it, in previous before AI, you'd have to know all these commands and you have to know all these CLI to execute
Mm-hmm.
this. Now
Right.
this is just, happening on its own. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
What this eventually does, it puts its findings and all the things it finds in this Endor Labs interface. And in this interface, you can go in and look at different types of issues. Let me show you an example of one of these issues. So, actually, let me pick up another one that has more context. This is a simple one, so you don't need a lot of that context. Uh, Maybe this guy. These are SAST findings um, that are coming from AI telling you where the problem is, what the problem is, the explanation, and so on. Actually, let me find a good one. I had a slide for that. It's not in the demo environment right now, but so we looked at the example of the tools that can be called. Here's an example of what an agent would do. It would look at your source code and it would generate very rich findings compared to any of the traditional scanners. And it would generate those findings in languages that a human could triage. One of the things that we frequently find is the application security engineers are not as well versed in code as developers. So they can't make sense of that finding very quickly. These agents will output the finding in natural language. They'll tell you what's the source, what's the sink, how does a CWE propagate through different steps, what is an attack vector that a malicious actor would use. So they will start
Mm-hmm.
by this function, what parameter they will change, and then what are the absent or present security controls that can be bypassed. So when you look
Mm-hmm.
at a finding like that, all of these questions, right? There's traditionally been a lot of friction between developer and security teams because security teams don't typically understand
Mm-hmm.
code as much as the developers do. So they trust the scanners to a larger extent. The scanners
Mm-hmm.
produce a lot of false positives. They go to the development team triages them and says, look, 80% of this is garbage, and that just leads to friction. So
Mm,
with these kind of agents that are built into Endor, a lot of that friction can be removed very, very seamlessly because not just that the explanation is very valid, the agent will triage itself, triage the findings that it produces itself. And so what it produces is very, very relevant and not
mm.
false positive.
Really interesting demo there. Just one question I have as a follow-up because we're almost out of time is can you, I mean, I saw that you had to like prompt the agent, I mean, ask it to check this package for vulnerabilities. Can you set it so that it automatically checks every single package that's being pulled from a source? Can you set
Yep,
that up
yep,
as an
absolutely.
orchestration?
Yep, you can set it up in two ways. I stopped screen share. You can go and actually you can let me for any of our viewers who want to try this, there is a free version of Endor's MCP server that you can get from Endor Labs, the
Mm-hmm.
documents here. And as part of that setup, if you, let's say, pick Cursor as an example, at the bottom you can see rules. Then you can add. And these rules will tell Cursor that whenever you're trying to download a new dependency, always run a scan to make sure that it's not pulling in any vulnerabilities that are critical or it's malware. You can set up these rules and modify these rules like that. For the paid version, they're also automatically shipped as part of hooks. But for the demo purposes, I called it so that you could see it live. But if I was actually giving it a prompt to generate code, this thing would have happened in the backend.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know and a nice little call to action as well as we close out to go and try out that version of Endor Labs, the open source one, to get started and get a feel for how this all works. Last question for you, if you could answer in like under a minute, that would be awesome. What excites you the most about the next few months, 6 months or so in this space, based on all that you see happening? What are you most excited about?
All of the things we talked about, but if I had to say it in 1 minute or less, I think the evolution of security um,
Hmm.
in the next 6 months is going to be a very exciting space to watch. You
Hmm.
know, traditional scanners have existed for decades that have been doing the same thing, and we've heard shift left, and we've heard development tax or security tax, and development and security friction, and all of these things that'll go away.
Mm.
That's my
Wow.
my my real belief, and that's what excites me most because
Mm.
AI has unlocked capabilities for security tools to become much more efficient.
Hmm.
They lack that security context that doesn't come naturally to them, but provided that context, they've been able to
Mm.
reduce a lot of friction in user experience. They've been able to reduce a lot of friction in asynchronous execution of security scanning. It'll truly move shift left because, like you saw, agents will start using it. Agents will become the main consumer of these tools as opposed to humans. So, very excited about that prospect and how security evolves in the next 6 months to sit alongside these agentic tools.
Awesome. Yeah, that's just an exciting thing to look forward to. Lesser friction between developers and security. Wow. Exciting times. Thanks so much for joining us today, Amod. It was really a pleasure chatting with you. Very exciting stuff what you spoke about, and I think really laid it out very clearly for us, just where we've come from and where we're at right now. Really exciting stuff, and great to see what you guys are building as well. Looks very, very usable and very well thought out with these different layers that you explained to us. And you even mentioned there's a free version to go and try out right away. So yeah, great conversation, very actionable, lots to take away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dwayne. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, and thanks to all of our listeners and viewers as well for tuning in. We hope you got a lot from this. And yeah, do check out Endor Labs and see what they're up to. Get in touch with Amod if you want to continue the conversation with him. And do join us again on the next episode. We'll see you on that one. Take care. Bye bye.